On Christmas Eve, 1945, in the small town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a fire consumed the Sauter family home in the middle of the night. When the flames were finally extinguished, 5 of the Sauter children had vanished without a trace. No bodies were ever found. No evidence of their deaths was ever discovered. And for the next 4 decades, their mother would dedicate her life to uncovering the truth about what really happened that terrifying night. A truth that suggested something far more sinister than a tragic house fire. George and Jenny Sauter were Italian immigrants who had built a successful life in America. They had 10 children, and on that Christmas Eve, 9 of them were home. The family went to bed around 10 p.m. after celebrating the holiday. The house was a 2-story wooden structure, and the 5 missing children, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, were all sleeping upstairs. Around 1 a.m., Jenny awoke to the smell of smoke. She opened her bedroom door to find the house engulfed in flames. George and Jenny managed to get 4 of their children out safely, the ones sleeping downstairs, but when they tried to reach the upstairs where the 5 others slept, the staircase was already consumed by fire. George tried desperately to reach the upstairs windows with a ladder to save his children, but both ladders that were normally kept against the house had mysteriously vanished. In desperation, George tried to move one of his coal trucks close to the house to climb up to the second-floor windows, but the trucks, which had worked fine the day before, wouldn't start. By this time, neighbors had noticed the fire and come to help, but it was too late. The house burned completely to the ground in just 45 minutes, an unusually fast time for such a complete destruction. When the fire department finally arrived, over 7 hours after being called, the house was nothing but ashes and debris. The fire chief did a cursory search of the ruins and announced that the fire had been so hot that it had completely cremated the 5 children, leaving no trace of them. This explanation satisfied local authorities, and the case was quickly closed. But George and Jenny refused to accept this conclusion. They knew that house fires, even intense ones, do not completely cremate human bodies. Cremation requires temperatures of over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, sustained for several hours. Their wooden house fire couldn't have reached those temperatures, and it had burned out in less than an hour. Even in the most devastating fires, bone fragments and teeth always remain. Yet when they sifted through the ashes themselves, they found nothing. No bones, no teeth, no trace that 5 children had died in that house. The evidence that something was terribly wrong began mounting almost immediately. The fire chief, who had been so quick to declare the children dead, had not conducted any real investigation. No official death certificates were ever issued for the 5 children. The coroner never examined the site. No autopsy reports existed because no remains were found. Even more disturbing were the strange events leading up to the fire. 2 weeks before Christmas, a life insurance salesman had come to the house. When George refused to buy a policy, the man became angry and made a chilling statement. "Your house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed." George had dismissed this as the ranting of an angry salesman, but after the fire, those words took on a sinister meaning. The day before the fire, a strange man had appeared on their property asking about the electrical work on the house. He pointed to fuse boxes and made cryptic comments about how it would cause a fire someday. The next night, the house burned. Most disturbing of all were the missing ladders. George had kept 2 ladders propped against the house. On the night of the fire, both were gone. They were found days later, thrown into a gully 75 feet from the house. Someone had deliberately removed them before the fire started. The trucks that wouldn't start were also suspicious. George was a coal truck driver who maintained his vehicles meticulously. They had been working perfectly the day before. Yet on the night of the fire, when he needed them most, both trucks were mysteriously inoperable. After the fire, mechanics examined them and found the electrical systems had been tampered with and the distributors removed.
Then came the sightings. In the weeks and months following the fire, multiple people came forward claiming to have seen the Sauter children alive after the fire. A woman who ran a restaurant 50 miles away said she had served breakfast to the 5 children on Christmas morning, less than 12 hours after the fire. She remembered them clearly because they were with 2 women and 2 men who seemed very strict, watching the children closely and not letting them speak. When the woman tried to talk to the children, one of the adults hustled them out quickly. A hotel clerk in Charleston, West Virginia, nearly 100 miles away, reported seeing 4 of the 5 children in the hotel lobby about a week after the fire. A witness in Florida claimed to have seen Betty years later, grown up but still recognizable, living under a different name. The most compelling evidence came years later. In 1968, more than 20 years after the fire, Jenny received a letter postmarked from Kentucky. Inside was a photograph of a young man in his late 20s. On the back of the photo was written, "Louis Sauter. I love brother Frankie. I.L. Boys, A90132 or 35. The photograph bore a striking resemblance to what Louis might have looked like as an adult. Jenny hired a private investigator to trace the letter, but the investigation led nowhere. The cryptic numbers and message on the back were never decoded. Was it really Louis? If so, why would he send a photo but not return home? What did the message mean? George hired private investigators and spent the family's life savings searching for his children. Every lead was pursued, every sighting investigated. He became convinced that the children had been kidnapped, possibly by an organized crime ring, perhaps in retaliation for his outspoken criticism of Mussolini and Italian fascism. George had been vocal in his opposition to the Italian dictator, and he had made enemies in the Italian-American community because of it. Some investigators theorized that the mafia had orchestrated the kidnapping as punishment, setting the fire as a cover and stealing the children to be adopted out or sold. This would explain the careful planning, the removed ladders, the sabotaged trucks, and the threatening visit from the insurance salesman. It would also explain why the children were seen alive after the fire, always accompanied by stern adults who kept them from speaking. The local authorities showed little interest in pursuing these theories. Some investigators who tried to help the Sauters received threatening phone calls, warning them to drop the case. Others reported being followed or intimidated. The Fayetteville police chief, who had been remarkably unhelpful during the initial investigation, later was caught stealing from the department and was connected to organized crime in the area. In 1949, a second search of the fire site was conducted. This time, investigators did find something: a few fragments of human vertebrae in the location where the living room had been. A forensic anthropologist examined them and determined they belonged to a 16 to 22-year-old person. All 5 missing Sauter children had been younger than 15. The expert also noted that the bones showed no signs of fire damage and seemed to have been planted at the site, possibly taken from a nearby cemetery or medical supply source. George erected a billboard along Route 16 with photographs of the 5 missing children, offering a reward for information. The billboard stood for decades, becoming a haunting landmark that thousands of travelers passed, a constant reminder of the mystery that was never solved. Jenny maintained until her death in 1989 that her children were alive somewhere. She kept their Christmas gifts wrapped and ready, displayed in her home year after year, waiting for the day they might return. George died in 1969, heartbroken and still searching. Neither parent ever accepted that their children had died in that fire. The case remains officially unsolved. Modern investigators who have reviewed the evidence agree that something was deeply wrong with the official explanation. A house fire could not have completely destroyed 5 bodies without leaving any trace. The suspicious circumstances before the fire, the sabotaged escape routes, the multiple sightings afterward, all point to something more sinister than a tragic accident. What really happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty Sauter? Were they kidnapped and raised under different identities? Were they killed elsewhere and their bodies hidden? Did they survive, and were they prevented from returning home by threat or coercion? Or did they die in that fire through some process that science cannot explain? The Sauter children disappearance remains one of America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries, a case where every answer raises more questions, where evidence points in impossible directions, and where 5 children vanished on Christmas Eve, leaving behind only questions, heartbreak, and a mother who never stopped believing they were out there, somewhere, waiting to come home. The Bermuda Triangle, a mysterious stretch of ocean between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, has claimed over 50 ships and 20 aircraft in the past century. But the terror began long before modern times, with disappearances so bizarre and unexplainable that they've haunted investigators for generations. These aren't just stories of vessels lost at sea. These are cases where experienced crews vanished in perfect weather, where ships were found completely abandoned with meals still warm on tables, and where aircraft disappeared mid-transmission, their final words frozen in time as evidence of something inexplicable. The documented horror of the Bermuda Triangle truly began on December 5, 1945, with the disappearance of Flight 19, a training mission that would become the most famous mystery in aviation history. 5 U.S. Navy torpedo bombers took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for a routine navigation training exercise. All 5 pilots were experienced, the weather was clear, and the planes were in perfect condition. 2 hours into the flight, the impossible began to unfold. At 3:45 p.m., the flight instructor, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, radioed the control tower with a message that sent chills through everyone who heard it. "We are entering white water. Nothing seems right. We don't know where we are. The water is green, no white." Control tower operators were confused. The area where they should have been flying had normal blue ocean water. What was Taylor seeing? Minutes later, Taylor's voice came through again, now filled with panic. "We can't find west. Everything is wrong. We can't be sure of any direction. Everything looks strange, even the ocean." This made no sense. These were experienced military pilots with functioning compasses and clear skies. How could they not know which direction was west? The radio transmissions grew more desperate. The pilots reported that their compasses were spinning wildly. All of their instruments were malfunctioning simultaneously, and they couldn't determine their location despite being able to see the ocean below them. Taylor's final transmission before the radio went dead was bone-chilling. "It looks like we are entering white water. We're completely lost." Then silence. All 5 aircraft, with 14 crew members aboard, vanished without a trace. The U.S. Navy launched the largest search and rescue operation in history at that time. Over 300 aircraft and numerous ships combed 250,000 square miles of ocean and land for 5 days. They found nothing. No wreckage, no oil slicks, no life rafts, no bodies. It was as if the 5 planes had been plucked out of the sky and erased from existence. But the horror wasn't over. A rescue plane, a Martin Mariner flying boat with 13 crew members, was sent to search for Flight 19. 23 minutes after takeoff, the rescue plane also vanished. In one afternoon, the Bermuda Triangle had claimed 6 aircraft and 27 men, leaving behind not a single piece of evidence. The official Navy report concluded with a statement that has haunted researchers ever since. They vanished as completely as if they'd flown to Mars. The Navy initially blamed Taylor for getting lost, but his mother fought this conclusion for years, and the official cause was eventually changed to causes or reasons unknown. But Flight 19 wasn't the beginning. It was simply the most famous case in a pattern of disappearances that had been occurring in that area for centuries. The true horror of the Bermuda Triangle stretches back much further, to incidents that are even more disturbing because they left behind eerie evidence that something unnatural was at work. In 1872, the Mary Celeste became one of history's most famous ghost ships. Found drifting between the Azores and the coast of Portugal, near the edge of what would later be known as the Bermuda Triangle region, the ship was completely seaworthy. Its cargo was intact, there was 6 months' worth of food and water aboard, and all the crew's personal belongings were in place. The ship's log showed normal entries up until the last day. But every single person aboard had vanished. The captain, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the crew of 7 were simply gone. Even more disturbing were the details. The breakfast table was set with food that was still warm. Coffee was still hot in the cups. The captain's pipe was on his desk, still packed with tobacco, as if he'd just set it down moments before. Navigation equipment was in place and functioning. The ship's lifeboat was missing, suggesting the crew had deliberately abandoned ship. But why would they abandon a perfectly functioning vessel with plenty of supplies? Most chilling of all was a sword found in the captain's cabin with what appeared to be blood on it, though it was never confirmed. And on the ship's rail, investigators found tiny handprints, as if a child had been standing there, gripping the rail, looking out at something in the water. No bodies were ever found. No debris washed ashore. The crew of the Mary Celeste vanished as completely as if they had never existed. One investigator's report noted, "It was as if some force had compelled every soul aboard to walk to the rail and step into the ocean, leaving behind their entire world mid-breakfast." In 1918, the USS Cyclops, a Navy cargo ship with 309 people aboard, vanished without sending any distress signal. The ship was 542 feet long and one of the Navy's largest vessels at the time. It simply sailed into the Bermuda Triangle and was never seen again. Not a single piece of wreckage was ever found despite extensive searches. The Navy's official statement remains one of the most unsettling in maritime history. The disappearance of this ship has been one of the most baffling mysteries in the annals of the Navy. All attempts to locate her have proved unsuccessful. There has been no information that might throw light upon her disappearance. What makes the Cyclops case particularly disturbing is that 2 of her sister ships, identical vessels, also vanished in the same area years later. In 1941, both the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus disappeared without trace in the Bermuda Triangle, taking hundreds more sailors with them. 3 identical ships, all vanishing in the same mysterious waters, all without distress signals, all without leaving any wreckage. The pattern of disappearances continued throughout the 20th century. In 1948, a British South American Airways plane, the Star Tiger, vanished with 31 people aboard. The pilot's final radio transmission was routine and calm, reporting normal conditions. Minutes later, when the control tower tried to contact the plane, there was only silence. The plane had disappeared mid-flight in clear weather. 1 year later, The star Ariel, a sister plane, vanished in the exact same area under identical circumstances. The final transmission from the pilot was, "All is well." Then nothing. Two identical planes, same route, same mysterious disappearance, no wreckage ever found. What's particularly terrifying about many Bermuda Triangle disappearances is the pattern of the final transmissions. Again and again, pilots and ship captains report the same phenomena in their last moments. Instruments going haywire, compasses spinning, strange fog or white water appearing, and a complete loss of spatial orientation despite clear visibility. In 1963, the Marine Sulphur Queen, a tanker carrying molten sulfur, vanished with 39 crew members. The ship was in constant radio contact and then suddenly went silent. Despite extensive searches, only a few life preservers were found, nothing else. No wreckage, no oil slick, no bodies, nothing from a 524-foot ship that had simply ceased to exist. Survivors from near misses in the Triangle tell even more disturbing stories. Pilots report seeing strange lights, experiencing bizarre electrical failures, and flying through clouds that seem to pulse with energy. One pilot described flying into a tunnel-shaped cloud formation that seemed to pull his plane forward with impossible force, causing all his instruments to fail and creating a sensation of time distortion. When he emerged minutes later, his watch had stopped, and radio contact revealed that he had somehow traveled 100 miles in impossible time. Ship crews report seeing strange lights beneath the water, experiencing sudden violent weather changes that appear and disappear within seconds, and watching their compasses spin wildly for no reason. Some describe a feeling of being watched, of sensing a presence in the water around them, and an overwhelming urge to jump overboard. Modern investigators have proposed numerous theories. Methane gas bubbles from the ocean floor that could sink ships and confuse instruments, rogue waves that strike without warning, magnetic anomalies that disrupt navigation, even downdrafts from hexagonal clouds that could bring down aircraft. But none of these theories explain all the cases. None explain the complete absence of wreckage. None explain the warm coffee and set breakfast tables on abandoned ships. None explain the experienced pilots' reports of white water and spinning compasses in clear weather. The Bermuda Triangle continues to claim victims even today. In 2015, the cargo ship El Faro sank with 33 crew members after sailing into the Triangle during a hurricane. In 2017, a small plane vanished with 4 people aboard, no wreckage found. The disappearances continue, each one adding to a mystery that has claimed hundreds of lives and defied every attempt at rational explanation. What lurks in those waters? Is it a natural phenomenon we don't yet understand, or something else entirely? Why do instruments fail? Why do experienced navigators become completely disoriented? And most disturbing of all, where do the bodies go? Even in the worst maritime disasters, bodies wash ashore, wreckage appears, evidence remains. But in the Bermuda Triangle, people and machines simply vanish into nothing, leaving behind only silence and the haunting question, what happened to them? The beginning of the Bermuda Triangle mystery showed us that some places on Earth remain beyond our understanding, where the rules of nature seem to bend and where those who venture in may never return. The Triangle waits, quiet and patient, for the next vessel to enter its waters, the next plane to cross its skies, and the next group of souls to join the hundreds who have vanished without trace into its dark, inexplicable depths.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.